Cool. Let's do this. In three, 2, 1. Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're gonna be listening to English Electric Full Power by Big Big Train. I am of course pleasant to have notes on the channel.
I'm doing fantastic. I can't wait to talk about this project with you.
I can't wait as well. So without further ado, let's get right into this video.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So before we start off this video and talking about this amazing album, we of course have to review it by listening to some of my favorite bits from this album. Note, you don't get any, that's just the customs on this channel, so you're gonna have to wait out this one.
Hopes have died. They flow like driftwood down the tide.
What do you think about this album?
I love the first part of the English Electric, like from start to finish, perfect album. The second part, the English Electric Part 2, it has some good parts and some not so good parts, and I didn't really connect with it all that much. And it wasn't until they brought both of those together with the EP of Make Some Noise that it all kind of came together for me. Like it all came together into this singular work that it clicked for me, and I was like, okay, I can understand some of those lower points a little bit better in this grander scale of things. I love listening to this album about now, like right during the summer start. It's very pleasant, it's very optimistic, and it's just got this warm feeling to it.
So I want to ask you, are the singular albums and the EP concept albums, or are they just compilations of songs? Because in this final, let's say, bigger cut, they're all pretty much remixed. Like it's not like you're listening to the first album, then the second album, the songs are intertwined. And I was thinking to myself whether this makes for one big concept album or is it just all over the place?
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in the middle of all that, because it's not like a full-on concept album. You know, it's not like a narrative concept album like The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway or Tommy or Subterranea or Snow. And I think like the official stance is that this is a compilation album of the two English Electric albums plus the few tracks from the EP. So in that sense, I don't think it's a concept album, but much like Kid A and Amnesia from Radiohead, like all these tracks were being written at the same time. And this isn't the last time that this band would do something like that. Like their most recent tracks of Common Ground and Welcome to the Planet, and even like Grimm's Pound and The Second Brightest Star, they write so much and they don't really know how to weed them out. So it's, I wouldn't say like a narrative concept album, but it is at least like they had the intent of writing a heck of a lot of music for this.
So you of course know the two singular albums. I personally, to everyone who's watching, I never listened to them in their original form as like their original album. So we basically have part 1, part 2 of the English Electric, and then we have the EP. So I've listened to them pretty shuffled, although I was keeping track to see where each song belonged, and I saw that they were pretty shuffled. And how would you say is the experience of listening to this entire compilation as opposed to listening to any of the singular albums? Do you feel like this compilation enhances it in some way?
That's a very, very astute observation there, because it does. As I mentioned at the beginning, English Electric Part 1 is practically a perfect album. Start to finish, it's great. But what it does is when you have it in the concept of the full electric and you have some of the tracks shuffled around, it elevates the music from the EP and the English Electric Part 2, where I wasn't as big of a fan of, but because of the shuffling around and making it flow much more narratively, I think it does elevate the music. It uses some of the tracks from Part 1 and what they were doing on Part 1. For example, Judas Unrepresented being the halfway mark of the first album is also the halfway mark of these two albums. So, and then Hedgerow, which was the end of the first one, is also the end of the first disc off of here. And so it provides a very clean first disc, second disc listen if you're listening to the full electric on CD. But it also gives a very clear midway point, kind of like if you're listening to like a record and you have to get up and flip the record over. So it plays with the ideas of albums having a midway point, having these kind of act sequences, and it does it very well.
How does the EP tie into like all of this? Was it made at the same time with this album? Was it like a later edition? Does it even relate? Because honestly, personally, I think like the EP songs the most on here, and there's only 4 of them.
I love the EP. I love Make Some Noise. I mean, the title track, Make Some Noise, is such a brilliant opener, and I understand why they put it as the opener of the full electric. I think what the EP did was where the albums proper were trying to, and again, this is me inferring to what the intent was rather than like being in the studio and asking them. Each of those albums, like Part 1 and Part 2, have an overall feeling, like an overall idea, whereas the EP allows them to break away from that. And so when they're sitting at the table for constructing this full electric, they're trying to figure out how these EP songs flow within the narrative of the full album.
So in my personal opinion, from listening to this, the music on here really screamed Genesis for me. And
Absolutely.
I'm open for like other interpretations, maybe other bands I don't know or I didn't think about, but there was something about it very, Peter Gabriel Genesis sound. And that's something that's really good. And it's also quite hinting to my overall opinion of this album, because personally, I didn't become a Genesis fan overnight, let's say. It took me quite a while to sit with the music. I remember listening, the first album I listened to by Genesis was, of course, Selling England by the Pound, which, if I'm correct, is probably your favorite or one of your all-time
favorite. Yeah, it's my favorite album of all time. Absolutely.
Yeah, so yeah, that one, I listened to it. I didn't like it at first. Then Firth of Fifth came along and I kind of got into it, but then I left it for a few years. Fell in love with Foxtrot, then gave it another try, and somehow it eventually worked. So this might be the same case, because there's something about that Genesis sound which doesn't immediately click for me. Now, of course, that's if you're saying that this sounds like Genesis, which was my personal opinion. And the thing that didn't quite click with me was the fact that it felt like the entirety of the album, most of it, felt like the filler tracks that they put on their albums. So
yeah, I can feel that.
They're not the meaty ones, and that's what this entire album felt to me like.
I think you're onto something in that. Like, I mean, there are a few tracks on here that could be more of like the Firth of Fifth or the Dancing with the Moonlight Night or those types of tracks, but really the meat and potatoes on this track are much more of those in-between tracks, like Timetable or For Absent Friends, some of those smaller tracks, but then exploded out into, instead of being like 2 to 3 to 4 minutes long, they're 8 minutes long. So I can definitely feel that. I mean, you're not really writing on an island in a lot of these, and there were a lot of bands, especially at this time, starting about 2005 or so, going all the way into like the mid 2010s, which is where this album kind of feels. There were a lot of bands that were using this very British UK style of progressive rock that was really formulated by bands like Genesis and Camel. But you had bands like Unitopia, like Magic Pie, that did very similar things in channeling that Gabriel era Genesis. And I felt like what kind of put Big Big Train and specifically this work apart was how much they leaned on the British UK scenery.
Do you feel there's any other influences on here? How well do you think Big Big Train were able to create their own unique sound? Which is another thing, because I encounter so many, like, yes, copycats, Genesis copycats, Pink Floyd wannabes on my channel. There's plenty of them. So how well is the Big Big Train sound defined on like these albums or this entire compilation album?
It's so interesting that you say that, because yes, I think that these guys are leaning very heavily on Genesis. And I think one of the reasons why this particular album gets the notoriety that it does is because of how successful they are at capturing the Genesis feeling. There's not a whole lot of other influences outside of, as I mentioned, maybe Camel every once in a while. And I know that they have a lot of guest stars on this album as well, where they themselves lean very heavily on their influences like Genesis and whatnot. But unlike other albums and other artists at the time, as I already mentioned, like Magic Pie and Unitopia, Big Big Train really didn't venture out of their kind of bubble. Whereas at least Unitopia and Magic Pie were looking at more contemporary influences as well. And yeah, I think part of the reason why, as I mentioned already, they captured that sound so successfully on this album, which is why it's so regarded in high esteem.
Yeah. Can you like point out your favorite tracks, or like even one or two of them, but mostly explain why? What do you find on them? Like, I can only assume you do have tracks on here which you consider to be perfect.
Because I'm very interested to hear what your favorites are, and see if they compare at all from mine. In terms of this album, again, I have varying degrees of love. In terms of like the first ones that I really, really enjoy, maybe not necessarily perfect, but the ones that I would point to and be like, yes, those are great. Those are some of my favorites. The first track of Make Some Noise. I also love Uncle Jack. I love how almost Moon Safari it is at times. It took a while for me to really get into Hedgerow. And it wasn't until much later on that I actually really grew to enjoy Hedgerow. And we're moving from really, really great tracks to near perfect tracks, which is the East Coast Racer. I love the buildup of that track. I love how you have this massive crescendo by the end of it that I just can't help but love. But the two tracks on here that I think are perfect, the first, Rebreather, the second track, which is also the track that opens up the English Lecture Part 1, and Judas Unrepresented. Judas Unrepresented, I think, is a perfect track. And one of the few perfect tracks. Like this, I still think is probably the best track that Big Big Train has written up until this point. The build-ups, the climbs, the chaotic presentation at the beginning that's met very quickly with some of the more somber parts on it. I always said that this is what Genesis would sound like if they kept Anthony Phillips on as their main guitarist. Just as a little bit of an aside while it was in my brain.
Interesting. So whenever I review a singular track, I mark to myself whether I think it's the best one so far. And I listened to Make Some Noise, I marked it, and then I didn't mark anything again.
Oh, interesting. So you think Make Some Noise was the best track off of here?
And the thing that really bothers me in that choice is the fact that it's definitely not the proggiest one.
No,
it's
it's not.
it's good, it's fun. It's not the proggiest one.
It's kind of like the Genesis singles, like we would have with like Twilight Elder House or
Yeah.
like I Know What You Like, you know, like it's definitely the prog single where on face value it's not really that proggy.
So the thing with this one, as it went along and I kind of did enjoy it, I started, unfortunately, subconsciously giving lower ratings to songs. I'm thinking about going ahead and listening to part one just to compensate for it and try and, evaluate this album in a shorter form, more concise form, because I do get the appeal.
Yeah, so I started my journey with Big Big Train with the Underfell Yard. I listened to it once or twice and I just didn't, I guess much like your experience with this, I just didn't get into it. Like I was like, why would I want to listen to this when I could just listen to Genesis? But when English Electric Part 1 dropped and I was seeing that it was getting quite a bit of praise, I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. And it really blew me away. And for me, it's much like how you dot the tracks when they come up in terms of like what's best. It's kind of similar here, where it hasn't really moved all that much in terms of like my love for Big Big Train. Like I still love a lot of their albums that they've put out. I still think that English Electric Part 1 / The Full Electric is their best work. The one thing that I love about Big Big Train, especially later on, is that like there's no one driving force, there's not just one singer-songwriter on it. Everybody contributes at least 1 or 2 tracks per album. They have such a organic and nurturing songwriting ship in that sense.
So if you had to recommend one album that wasn't, of course, the English Electrics or the Underfell Yard, one of their later ones, I can only assume, which ones would you recommend that I give a listen to?
Probably if you liked Make Some Noise, I think the Folklore album, the direct follow-up, the one that they released in 2016.
So I'll add it to the reserve list, like definitely, because it's not a band like Big Big Train. No matter what I said throughout this video, Big Big Train, they're not a band that I want to forget about. That's not the case. So we have most of what we need, I think, like in the terms of reviewing this one.
The only thing that we're missing is the score, the rating.
On a really straightforward point, like you're going in a record or a CD shop and you see this, what do you think of this?
I mean, it's not all that inviting for me personally, if I'm being honest. It does have the essence of a compilation album, so I think in that sense it's doing its job quite well. But I'll also admit that the covers for English Electric Part 1 and 2 are probably the least interesting. I do enjoy that the English Electric, at least the title, is similar throughout the two, but it's probably just like a copy and paste aspect on there. But at least it gets the point across that in some respects it's a bit of a daunting thing. What do you think about it?
So I'd have to agree, it's not that inviting. I feel like there's some sort of intensity on it. So the cover by ELP, the one with the train, I don't remember which album it is.
Yes, is that In the Hot Seat?
In the Hot Seat, yeah. Okay, definitely. So that cover to me always looked very like intense, very metallic, very like, there's some sort of motion, let's say, although it's like a still frame, everything felt alive about it. And for some unknown reason, when I look at this cover for this compilation, it takes this entire In the Hot Seat idea and just shrinks it down to one symbol. To me, that feels very strong and raw in some way, like it's been there for a long time. It's very rusty, but you can still tell what it is. It's like a relic of the past, which is definitely a lot of what this album is. It feels like a relic of the past. I really like the aesthetic of this one. I think it's pretty cool, actually. It's not supposed to be appealing. I don't think that's the idea. And of course, I'm saying this, a band has to have some tactfulness in times and understanding that, well, this is our first album, so we gotta put the band name on it because we want people to know who we are. Or like if you're Pink Floyd and everyone knows who you are, so you're gonna do something very memorable in your cover. But then you have these guys that know that the main people who are gonna buy this CD are their fans, they're loyal fans, and they want to give them something that feels really personal, at least in my opinion. So they took the bare essence of the two covers for the English Electric part and they really minimized it to one thing, and I think they've nailed it quite well. And I think this is a cover done right, but in a very different way. We don't usually see that, and I don't usually review compilation albums on here, so it makes sense.
For sure. Yeah, I didn't think about it that way, but you're right.
In my personal opinion, this album will receive a rating of 6 out of 10. And that's definitely something that a lot of people find slightly distressing. But for longtime viewers of this channel, you know that I am very much critical of many of the albums I listen to on here. Yeah, it's a 6, but what do you think about this album? You can rate it however you like.
For me, it's an interesting one because English Electric Part 1 for me is a masterpiece. It's a 10 out of 10. English Electric Part 2 has wavering qualities, so for me that was more like a 7 out of 10 or like a download. So because this combines the two, this one is as a whole like a 9 out of 10, or like I love it with my whole heart. It's not a perfect stream of music, like from start to finish, it's definitely not perfect, but it has perfect elements in it with items that they're doing the best that they can with it. So that's why for me this is like a 9 out of 10, and it is an album that I still love with my whole heart.
I think it's a fine rating. I always love giving an album rating of like, let's say a 9 out of 10, like in some sort of place like of pride within me, knowing that I'm able to say that something that I love with my whole heart isn't perfect. I think that's something that always hard for me to just say, oh, I loved it so much, but I'm really aware of the imperfections found within it, and just say, you know what, it isn't perfect, but I still love it. And yeah, thank you very, very much for coming on here. Thank you for helping me.
Yeah, it's a massive undertaking, so I'm very happy to help lift the heavy load.
It is. We were supposed to do the episode about On a Line by David Gilmour, which unfortunately didn't go as planned, but that album was, it was easy peasy. I easily made a video about it like on my own. But this one was such a major undertaking, and the fact that I didn't have like the the lingering excitement of loving every bit of it, it also was kind of remedied by your presence. So thank you so much for giving your opinion, giving information, and really adding a lot to this one. I'm really looking forward to listen to The Underfall Yard and Folklore. Yeah, okay. Yeah, big train. I'm so happy I got through this one. This is the longest album on the list. I checked. There's gonna be nothing longer than this one. So
I was gonna say, I can't think of too many like singular albums that are longer than this, outside of maybe Everything at the End of Time, I think it's what it is.
Yeah, so I believe that's about it. Again, thank you very, very much. Do you have anything else that you would like to add before we finish this off?
Not that I can think of. Thank you so much for having me on. This is always a pleasure. And I've been having so much fun chatting with you just about all the different musics that we enjoy. Amazing.
Fantastic. By the way, for anyone who isn't aware, we did a video on Notes' channel talking about ranking all the Moon Safari albums, which there are only 4 of. Of course, check the link down in the description. There's a link to your channel. There's a link to that video. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. This has been us. The next, I have to mention what's the next episode. Wait a second.
What is the next episode?
Stay tuned for tomorrow, because we're going to be listening to Reflections on the Future by the band 2066, and then a very interesting album. Very, very interesting album. I enjoyed it quite a lot, but I don't want to spoil it for tomorrow's episode, so I'm just gonna not say anything about it any more than that. But again, thank you to my supporters over on Patreon, and that's about it. Bye guys.